Hello and welcome to another miniature painting video for Mansions of Madness. Today I'm going to be painting the skeleton model. I think this is Fantasy Flight Games' probably laziest model. I kind of wish they just updated the old model, which is actually a full skeleton. This one was like, let's just take some clothes and put bone limbs on it. And we're done. So anyways, let's get started. Alright, first of all, if you're curious, I primed the figure in gray using Army Painter's Uniform Gray. Next, I start with the pants here, and I'm just going with that Steel Agent Drab once again. I like the really dark brown pants. My paints are somewhat thin here, so I do need to do kind of a couple layers here and there just to get kind of a nice even coat. Generally, when I'm painting, I like to start with kind of the hard to reach areas, or the areas that I'll definitely get kind of painted over perhaps, or will paint over other areas as I'm working along the way. Next up, I'm tackling the vest, which I'm going to paint with Loren Forest to give kind of a nice green color. Then right above that, I'm going to tackle the shirt. This part of the model's it's really hard to tell what exactly is going on there. It does look like there is a tie, but the problem is the tie looks a little too short at the top to be considered a knot, and then it goes way too big very quickly to be sort of an actual tie. So in this model, I decided to just keep it the whole shirt. But in my other model, if you do look at it, I did paint it as if it were a tie. I don't know which one I prefer, really. Go with whatever you think's best there, because it's really hard to tell what Fantasy Flight Games was trying to do. Next up, I go with Greedy Gold from Army Painter on that little chain that goes across the vest. Now for the overcoat, I decided to go with a Vallejo color, and that color is London Gray. There's not going to be a lot of difference here between London Gray and sort of the base gray tone of Uniform Gray, but it is a slightly lighter gray, but it's kind of hard to tell here on camera. Nonetheless, I do think it shades up pretty nicely, and you'll see definitely kind of the difference in the gray color. Next up, we're going to tackle the bone areas, and we're going to tackle with some Ushabti Bone. Now, my paints are pretty thin here, so I'm going to have to go over each area kind of 2 or 3 times to get kind of a nice even coat. The other thing you'll notice is probably right around there, I nicked the sleeve of the coat, and so I'm going to have to go back and correct things. When you're painting the base coat, don't always worry too much about nicking some sides or something like that, just you can always go back and use your base coat and just kind of go over that little area where you may have nicked something. Since I primed the figure in gray, this bone color is going to be slightly annoying to work with. I'm going to have to do several layers to get kind of a nice even coat, and so you can't actually see through to the gray. If I had primed the figure in white, I think it would have been slightly easier, at least for the bone, but I like gray just to kind of keep things a little bit more neutral. So lastly, for whatever reason, I decided to tackle the shoes last. Luckily, they're pretty easy to paint, and so not hard to reach or anything like that. And basically, I'm using a color from last miniature painting video, which was Mournfang Brown mixed with a little Mephiston Red. I just really like the brown color that this produces once you shade it. And that does it for the bases. Now we're going to start shading the figure. Really not too many shades here. The first thing I'm going to start with is Agrax Earthshade. Just going to use that on all the browns. So the pants here, going to let it pool in a lot of sort of the places where I want really dark shadows, but I'm going to kind of smooth it out a little bit. I don't want it to pool too much, but just enough. I'm also going to use it for the shoes at the bottom. I'm also going to put a little bit on the chain just to kind of shade it a little bit, and then a lot sort of on the bone itself, and this is to kind of pick out the gaps so you can see the separated bones and kind of the knuckles and the joints and that kind of thing. Also on the skull itself, this should just kind of make the Ushabti bone kind of a nice darker color. Next, the white shirt, and I'm just going to use Nuln Oil here, but I'm going to water it down a little bit because, again, it's white and I don't want to highlight it too ridiculously much. Then I'm going to use pure Nuln Oil on the overcoat. Once again, I'm going to let it pool in a lot of the recessed areas, but I, again, don't want it to be too thick in most of the shadowed areas. For the vest, because I want to darken this green up just a little bit, I went with Coelia Greenshade. So nice and simple. Now all the oils are done. I'm going to do some highlights. For the pants, again, I'm just going to take the original base coat and just kind of put some quick little highlights kind of on the folds, especially around the knee area, and just kind of hit just a few select areas here and there. I really don't want to push the highlights on these figures that crazy high, because again, I like to keep it dark. Then on the shoes, I'm basically doing the same thing as well. Hitting that original base coat, I'm just going to put some really on the tips. I don't want it to go too high, but mostly on the tips. And then the vest as well, I'm just hitting the edges and the buttons with a little bit of Loren Forest. And then we go to the overcoat, London Gray once again. And I'm just going to hit sort of the edges right around and just a few sort of select kind of the ridges and valleys of the overcoat. Now to tackle the last and probably the hardest bit of this miniature is going to be the bones themselves. For that, I decided to use Screaming Skull, and that's more of a sort of bone white color. So it's a pretty bright bone color, but I felt that these miniatures kind of show, and the artwork for this kind of shows sort of a bone white figure. So the bones are clean for the most part. Otherwise, what you could do is use the original base coat and just do the same sort of highlight I'm doing here, and then use Screaming Skull as an additional highlight if you really wanted to push certain areas like the top of the skull and that sort of thing. This is another paint that, because of the consistency and the color of it, you're going to want to go over several areas several times in order to get sort of a nice, bright, solid color. I am trying to be careful here to leave certain areas sort of dark, like the teeth and sort of between the bones, between the knuckle bones as much as possible. I do admit that the details around that area, especially around the hands, is very hazy and it's hard to kind of notice things, but do the best you can. Alright, and then as a final touch, I want to dab some white straight into the eyes there, and then I'm also going to highlight that vest, shirt, the tie, whatever it is, up just a little bit. I dab the eyes, and then lastly I'm going to take Biel-Tan Green, which is a shade, and I'm just going to dab just a small bit in the whites of the eyes to give sort of a nice green glow. You will notice that my white probably went just a little bit too far and it's kind of just outside the eyes a little bit. I do go back just off camera and kind of fix that up with a little bit of Screaming Skull. So don't worry if your eye, when you try to do the eyes, if you get it just a little off, you can always go back over with your highlight or your base tone, whatever is in that area, and you can fix it right back up. For that other model you see spinning there, I really didn't do a whole lot of difference there, but I used the base coat for the shoes in our first model that I went over and used that for the coat. I did Steel Legion Drab for the vest instead, and I gave him a silver chain. Oh, and I also painted the shoes black. Also, just so you know, I do keep the big stupid black bases that everybody hates for Mansions of Madness. I do play Arkham and Eldritch Horror, and I do like the idea of using them for switching out the enemies and things. I do it occasionally. It's really kind of more painful than it's really worth, but I still like the idea, so I'm keeping the black bases for now. But if it ever does change, I will probably do some sort of fancy basing thing, and if that ever does change, I will definitely do a video on what exactly I plan to do. Alright, and that does it for this miniature painting video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to be continuing. I believe the next miniature I'm going to try and tackle, which I'm doing some color tests for, is the Star Vampires. As always, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and leave a comment below if there's anything you would like to see in future videos so that I can prove this for you and make it even more worthwhile for you to learn miniature painting, or to at least, tackle your own Mansions of Madness set. Thank you for watching, and see you next video. Bye!